Welcome to Goalie Science, the podcast where we bridge the gap between the scientific theory and practice around goaltending and the sport of hockey. This week's episode is presented by Jamie Phillips' YouTube page. If you are not subscribed yet, you are missing out. There is video review, there is practice breakdown, and the monetary amounts that come from advertisements do not pay me at all. And so let Jamie know why I deserve to be on payroll. Jamie, how are we doing today?
You don't deserve to be on payroll just yet, although there will be times where I might need you to fill in for my EGM Sunday meetings, and I will pay you for those. But I'm doing well, doing really well. It's a nice Sunday here in the middle of nowhere, Houghton. And for our topic today, I know we were going back and forth, but one thing that I thought was really cool was I was just thinking about when I was younger, what resources did I go towards, and from everything, from all different sorts of media. And the first one that I wish still existed. Do you remember Goalies World magazine?
Do I? There's no way that's not around anymore, is it?
No, they went out of business a long time ago, and I think In Goal Mag is technically the only zine that still exists, even though it's online. But if I remember, the best part about, well, one was the advertisements, because I just wanted every set of gear.
Yeah.
But the stats, and I knew all the goalies of all the stats from every league, because they had posted from, and they used NCAA, Major, Junior, and I think the SP and up, and had all their stats. And so I knew where every team was. I knew where every guy was playing, like all these names. I just thought that was such a cool resource. I wish that existed still. And that was still in the age of the internet, when before Elite Prospects, and it was a hockey DB was mostly the main source for talent. But I don't know why that popped in my head.
I mean, the clear message there is that no one should try to make a brand entirely off goaltending. Right?
No, why would anyone make any sort of only? It's not. You're very backed into a corner.
Yeah, you really put yourself in a tiny box. No, that was, again, I didn't spend nearly as much time as you, but I remember going through that. I've been obsessed with, obviously still am obsessed with goalie stats for a long time. But yeah, the first glimpse, also 1990s and early 2000s SP, I can only imagine was, how long has the SCHL been around for?
That's a good question.
It was founded in 2004, so scratch the late 90s. So that makes sense. So we would have been early teens when SP came out.
And they actually, some of them would have included the old Central Hockey League.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking about that. Before the ECHL became an actual full league.
Yeah, the ECHL was a competitor of the Central Hockey League, and I don't know if the SP was technically in there, but there was also the Western Professional Hockey League that was in there. It was really the wild, wild west.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about how it still kind of is now, but it must have obviously been. We should get some people who played in those leagues. I mean, obviously there's lots of stories out there, but add that to the list, Jamie.
Yeah, we'll add that to the list. Wow, I'm looking at the Central Hockey League. I didn't realize the Brampton Beast were in the Central Hockey League. That's the last team I ever played for.
That I did know. For those who are not from Southern Ontario, you should all check out the Powerade Center as one of the pinnacles of hockey. There's nothing that quite encapsulates minor hockey, like having your rink as part of a fourplex of a community center. It's a great rink, don't get me wrong. The arena is nice.
The arena is nice, but nothing says pro hockey like 6 people watching a game on a Tuesday afternoon at 11 a.m.
Come on, that's prime time.
Yeah. Actually, I loved afternoon games, but you know what? We might have to have an episode where we literally just talk about the names of professional hockey, the Denver Cutthroats.
Wow.
And their mascot, guess what their mascot was?
Was it a pirate?
Close.
Was it Zorro?
No. So stay more on a water-based themes.
I don't know, man. Just tell me. This isn't making good radio at all.
I don't know what type of fish it is, but it is a fish.
That's funny.
I don't understand. Yeah, we might have to have a deep dive, because there are some incredible names. But back off our tangent, Ben, when you looking back when you were younger, or things now, what resources or things do you use? And I know that sometimes resources are not 100% like goalie specific. Sometimes they are encapsulating other things, including different sports. So like, what kind of things are you into right now? Where are you getting a lot of your knowledge from?
Okay, well, first, a brief throwback. Although I think Don Cherry got in trouble, but my family actually owns every Don Cherry's Rock'em Sock'em hockey from like the inception to, I don't even know if they make them anymore. But like one of my aunts used to buy it every year for us for Christmas, and so I have every single one. And nothing really highlights how confusing goaltending is than watching like the goalie save section of that.
I love it.
Like, I always struggle with this, right? Like, even if you go on YouTube now, so the equivalent is going to watch like 2022, 2023 NHL best saves, right? Go watch that YouTube video. 9 times out of 10, the goalie has done something so remarkably wrong to end up in that clip. And this is going to be a hot take. As much fun as it is to see a big save, like I actually think it kind of isn't that great. Looking back on it, like from a perspective now, I'm like definitely a sour sport on this one. But every time I watch those videos, I just find myself being like, there's a lot of not teachable stuff here. There's a lot of things wrong going on.
Yeah. Oh, I love drops. What I would do, so my older brother and I and our friends, we would typically his friends, because I just wanted to hang out with the older kids, but they'd put our mini stick nets in our basement and we'd turn on the Rock'em Sock'em and we played mini sticks and I'd pretend to be whoever it was. It was like Tommy Sallow or
Oh my God.
Dominic Hasek. It didn't even matter. That's actually a low key, pretty good resource. But yes, now as we're coaches and we see like some of the mistakes that the goalies are making, we're like, oh, how did we let this happen?
We just let it happen. But no, I think like resource wise, I think, well, first of all, let's plug the Jamie Phillips YouTube channel. But I think there's more and more educational content that is accessible, right? We always talk about, you're a parent, you're a goalie, and you don't have access to goalie coaching all the time, that you got to find something that works, right? And so when, we have parents coming out all the time being like, I'm looking for this, I have questions about this, I saw this, I read this. And ultimately, I think that there are some great resources. Like I think In Goal Mag does a really nice job a lot of the time. Again, we're never going to agree 100% with everything anyone says. And that's not to say that we're right or they're right. And the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. But like, I think In Goal Mag is great for a lot of the stuff they do. I think there's also a decent amount of stuff on media. So if like you're a parent or a coach, whatever that is, right? Like there's definitely some of the weeds to look through online, but there's definitely some good goalie resources that you can find. Like Kevin Woodley, he's from In Goal Mag, is a great resource. Sean Shapiro, give a shout out to him, is a sports journalist, but has a goaltending background with himself. And so covers a lot of interesting stuff from goaltending. But again, I think the real thing there is also just to understand there's a grain of salt when you're looking through your own stuff, right? Like the do your own research thing, and we're not going to get into that, is a very nuanced and complicated situation, right? But yeah, I think you do some great resources. And then there's some, should we just compile an Instagram list of goalie coaches we think do a great job? The goalie science approved podcast list.
Yeah, you get the stamp of approval. I think that's today's day and age. YouTube and social media is good. Although we do caution, like sometimes a lot of times there are dumb things and bad things. And and yes, that is what it is. But what I do like is a lot of times kids will send me a post from someone and they'll be like, what do you think? And I'll just say, I like this, or no, I don't, I disagree, and here's why. And I think that's really important in terms of filtering through. And there's tons and tons of resources, and they come from everything from multimedia to books. We didn't want to turn this into a strict book club, but there was a book from Dan Bilesma, NHL coach, Stanley Cup winning coach Dan Bilesma, and it was called "So You Want to Play in the NHL," and it talks about kind of navigating that journey that like he took and recommendations for younger athletes. So I'm going to pull that up. And while I'm pulling that up, did you know that I somehow on Wikipedia stumbled down a rabbit hole, and the Colonial Hockey League, Professional Hockey League, didn't know it existed, but there was a pro hockey team in Brantford, Thunder Bay, St. Thomas, Ontario, as well as Chatham, Ontario, all had professional hockey teams.
Was the Chatham team the Maroons as well? Was that original?
The Chatham Wheels.
Even better. I was wrong, and I've never been happier to be wrong. Go Wheels.
I just thought it's kind of funny that St. Thomas had a pro hockey team at a point in time.
Jamie, did you not? This is going to be talking junior hockey in Ontario. The Leamington Flyers, formerly of the GOJHL, now a junior A team.
Leamington's a junior A team?
Yeah.
As of when?
This is their first year.
Oh, good for them. I backed up in Leamington one game, not on the team, but we played against them and I did not play.
Yeah. Starting the 2023-2024. I don't know how that is going to work division-wise, but if you're listening in Southern Ontario or you're a goalie who wants to play junior hockey, there is now another junior A team in Ontario.
But this book, sorry to cut you off, we're going off the rails there, but the book's called So You Want to Play in the NHL, A Guide for Young Players, and it's by Dan and Jay Bilesma, the brothers. It is actually pretty old. It's like it's 2000, so some of the things might be slightly outdated, but honestly, the biggest takeaways of the book still stand, and it's just about like navigating, and it's just about like how do you weed, how do you get through the weeds and the rapids of pro hockey and not even pro hockey, like minor hockey, and working it up. And it's very, very good for parents. And I think that that's really important. That's not just for kids. It's a very good book for parents.
Yeah, I mean, I think that stuff's important too, right? I like a good book that balances some anecdotes, so some personal stories that draw you in, but also understands that those stories aren't always facts either, right? They're a thing that did happen, but that's not the way it always works, right? One path for one person is not the same path for another. And I think that's always an important distinction. That kind of ties into something that I've been reading, Jamie. If we're giving recommendations, and this one's going to be primarily for parents and coaches who are listening, but there's a book I've been reading called The Tyranny of Talent by Joe Baker, which dives into the realities of like youth athletic development and, a little bit of hockey here and there, but it's more about sport generally. But there's one thing that I really like, and Jamie, I'm not sure how much you've dealt with this as a coach, but it's this idea that for each person, it doesn't matter how much training. You cannot out practice your environment and your biology, right? It's not, we always hear these stories of people who make it despite horrible circumstances, whether that's, family things or they're like other environmental things. And these great triumphant stories. But there's a lot that goes into that. And it's not just practicing really, really hard or trying really, really hard. I wish I could tell everyone that if you just practice and try really, really hard, you'll make it. Jamie, did you practice and try really, really hard?
Yes. And yes, I did. And I did.
Good. I mean,
I was pretty close.
You're pretty close. You were also 6'4". You also started doing goaltending training pretty consistently and pretty often. At what age?
12.
The minute you started being a goalie, like within the first year?
Yes. The first time I was on the ice was at a goalie school.
Yeah. Right. And so, I mean, that's the realities now. Right. And again, I mentioned Sean Shapiro before, but he's got an article in him that I haven't truthfully fully dove into. So maybe we won't talk too deeply about it. But this idea that everyone has a goalie coach now, which is true. Right. So that's the reality. Like the playing field is leveled with a lot of things. And so what I liked about this book, Tyranny of Talent, is it just highlights that, right? And it's okay to acknowledge that. It's not discouraging, right? To say that not everyone makes it. It's just a fact, right? And understanding that you should be working as hard as you can to get as far as you can. But, just because you work hard and you practice hard and you do everything right doesn't mean you're going to make it, doesn't mean you deserve to make it, because there's lots of people who are doing that same process. And so a healthy dose of humble pie and a good reminder that sport is complicated and not perfect and messy, right?
Yeah, it is sport. That couple of things you were saying there remind me of The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Another
this book calls out that book, so careful.
Oh, okay. So how about this? How about you read The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell and then you read The Tyranny of Tyrants. Tyranny of Talent.
How about I save you this and you just go right to Tyranny of Talent? Outliers is interesting, but it's
still a good read because it does talk about how situations play a large role into somebody's success. And I think that that's a large proponent of it. And you're like, I know you have some cynicky, smart remark you're just waiting to make.
Oh, I'm so jumping at the bit. Everyone should go listen to If Books Could Kill, the episode on Outliers that talks about everything that Jamie's promoting good. Although this is an open offer. If Malcolm Gladwell wants to sponsor the podcast, he can.
Should we have Malcolm? He's Canadian. I don't know if he'd want to come on in our podcast, but it would be good. Another book that I really, really like is The Sports Gene, Inside the Science of Extraordinary Athletic Performance. This is more of it's science based, but it's not super science heavy. The author, David Epstein, does a really good job of distilling different types of athletes. And I think I remember reading this one in college. Actually, there is a brief shout out to Michigan Tech in there, but I can't remember why. So again, shout out Michigan Tech. But they talk about like how different circumstances and different genetic components create very good athletes. Why are East African, like Kenyan, Ethiopians, why are they really good runners? Is that just a stereotype? Is there a genetic predisposition to this? Things like the Nordic countries, how come they tend to be good at skiing and have high VO2 maxes? Is that just because it's very cold? Or is there something that has led and different traits that have, I can't even remember my genetics, I haven't taken genetic class in a long time, but there's just different traits that have persisted that have allowed them to be successful in different avenues. And it comes from different things like hip structure. There's a different hip structure between people from Eastern countries and Asian countries and more Western countries. And so these things add up and they're really important. I think it's just a really good book to read. And anytime that we can learn a little bit more about the science of athletic performance, I think that's awesome. And if there are things that we can read and be critical about it, like Ben being critical of the outliers, I think that's important too, because sometimes it's okay to change your mind and learn and make mistakes and grow from that. So for me, another one is definitely The Sports Gene. 10 out of 10 recommend. What are you going to say?
I'm not going to say anything that way. But again, if you want these are all good. Look, you can always pull something from books. I'm always a little hesitant around pop science books in general. So just because I spend my time or some of my time reading the science that gets eventually cited in those books, and it's not always as clear cut as sometimes some authors make it seem. But that's important of being critical, right? And that might be unintentionally the theme of this one, right? So whether you're being critical of what you're seeing on social media around goaltending, or you're being a little bit more critical about what we're reading, or if we're being critical of what we're reading too, that's just an important thing to keep in mind that way. I actually, Jamie, I kind of just, I have not spent the past few years reading much for my own personal fun. I'll be the first one to admit it, but I actually think there's a lot of value in that, just in general. So again, is this a casual recommendation to our younger listeners that find some books and keep reading? This is Goalie Science Promotes Literacy. Is that where we're headed?
It might be, but I think you're on the right path. So one of the things then, I think we're recording this podcast on the 18th. So I think the next episode, we're going to talk a lot more about mental health and things. And one of the things that one of the sports psychologists at the Winnipeg Jets talked about in terms of falling asleep was trying to read fiction before bed, because it just allows you to have a little bit more of a distraction, or reading a book that you enjoy before bed rather than reading like a self-help book or a business book, which are things that I read before bed and don't help me fall asleep. And I did not listen. But it is important. So like, and understanding that there is a lot of value in being able to, I want to say, like disassociate a little bit from athletics and kind of get lost in your imagination. That's very healthy for athletes. And it's something that we as athletes tend not to do a lot, because we're told, oh, you got to be dialed all the time. If you're not always like focused, then you're losing. No, it's okay. You can't be focused 100% all the time. And if reading a book, or may I even say, like, even if it's playing a little bit of video games or something, not a lot, but just a little bit, once you finish your homework and everything's done, to help you relax your mind. That is really, really important. And that's something that shouldn't be taken for granted.
Jamie, did you find yourself, when you were in college, did you ever have like the mental capacity to even read for pleasure between school and hockey at that point? Or were you just like, had you tuned that out at that point?
Honestly, I don't have that mental capacity right now. Although I did read one of those hockey romance books because it was sent to me. We'll save that for a different podcast. But that's probably actually the first like fiction book that I've read in a while.
Like, even when you were playing, like, did you, like, I know now obviously you're doing a few things. If you know Jamie, he's a little bit busy, but like, looking back on your time playing, was that even something you felt you could dive into?
I had the capacity to. I just thought if I'm going to spend this time reading, it needs to be like a self-help mental sports book.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that that's just not sustainable.
Yeah. That there's like, you need to actually have some balance still, right?
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, ultimately, that's where a lot of our conversations end up is, when we're talking about books, we're talking about resources. It's that there has to be a balance to this all, right? And so, like, you don't need to be constantly consuming help. Like, I'm going to say it, you don't need to constantly consume helpful things. You are allowed to still do things for fun. And that seems like a crazy concept. But we really oversimplify the pathway to elite performance, right? And so, or what we consider the path to elite performance, when in reality, a lot of the time is like sports should just be fun.
Yeah.
Right. And like, there's definitely the misconception, like winning in the result of a hard work when you're playing at the professional level is not the same amount of fun as playing with your friends road hockey when you're 10, right? Those are two very different things. And pro athletes, a lot of them will acknowledge that, it's a privilege to play a game for their careers and be compensated if they're at the highest level, like very well for it. But that's just, you know what I mean? That's work, right? That's not just a game. Their work is a very serious, high stakes, monetary related game.
Yeah.
Right. So like I asked you if you felt like you could do that, but that's the mentality that you think you have to use in that level, right? Like that's where the brain goes. That's what you're told you have to do because it's a privilege to be where you're at, and all these things that we hear regularly, right? Like you had to do that because you couldn't squander that opportunity, so you had to be taking advantage of every second, right?
Yeah. And actually, it's funny because now I'm going to reference another book to reference your topic. There's a book called The Rise of Superman, Decoding the Science of the Ultimate Human Performance by Stephen Kotler. This is a pretty, I would say, advanced book. And it's lots of like neurochemistry and stuff, which is way beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But one of the things that he did say in terms of finding flow state or getting into that flow state is there has to be an element of fun. There has to sometimes be an element of anxiety or nerves to allow that. But if you're not enjoying it, then it's very difficult to get in the zone. And I think that that's really important. So if you really want to nerd out into the mental side, read The Rise of Superman. It's a good read. It is thick, but ultimately to sum it up is you need to be a little bit nervous. It's okay to be a little nervous because that means you care, but also you need to have fun. And if you're having fun, you're able to get into that flow state a lot quicker.
So here we go, talking about full circle, right? So if we go back to Jamie calling out Malcolm Gladwell, or me calling out Jamie calling out Malcolm Gladwell as outliers, right? One of the big criticisms of that book is that it takes this idea of the 10,000 hours to be an expert and doesn't fully support that with science, but it is based on like a career's worth of work by an author, last name Erickson. He recently passed away in 2020, but he was at a school in Florida. I'm forgetting if it's Florida Atlantic or either way. But it looks at this idea, the 10,000 hours thing, that concept comes from this idea of deliberate practice. And like the origin of that research for deliberate practice starts with highly trained musicians. And it's this idea that like, in order to be the best, you need to train in a highly specific way, like very, very, very focused, and it's not always going to be enjoyable. And so that's where that started, in like that idea in like the early 90s, where, these are the criteria that you need in order to become an expert performer. It's going to require these things. What we've actually seen in the sports research that's looked at this idea of deliberate practice is that people and high performers actually find their training fun, right? So in the original research, they were like, you got to suffer through this, but that changes in sport. You're allowed to enjoy the training process. And you and I have talked about this before. Like some of my favorite hockey memories, just weird to think about now is, I'm almost getting close to 7 years removed from it now. It's this idea that like I look really fondly back at like skating at like 10 p.m. on a Thursday in July.
I love Saturday skates on ice at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
And those are the most fun too. And that's something I realized towards when my career was ending and things were not going well, and I was still reluctant to reach out and get help. I loved the off season and the off season training more than I loved the in season, and I didn't know why. And it was because there was no pressure, and I didn't have the ways to deal with that pressure. And we've done that before, and we'll get into that later. But yeah, like having fun and enjoying it. That's why I love working out now, because I just enjoy it.
Yeah, and like you don't need to. I mean, again, there's definitely times in training and life where you got to push through stuff that's not fun, but ultimately, like, there needs to be a component in the pursuit of excellence. And it seems like the pursuit of excellence in sport, there needs to be this balance of enjoying that process.
Yeah.
And so if you're not, something to consider, right?
And it's hard. It's okay. So what everyone says is like, you trust the process, enjoy the process. It's okay that not every single day is going to be the best. You're going to have highs and lows, but if the sum and the average of all those days is a net positive, you will go farther than if the sum of those days or the average of those days is a net negative. And that's really, really important, because and you know what the thing is too, is like, this turned into a little bit of a book club, and I don't really know what the theme of this podcast is today, but a lot of these books will tell you the exact same thing. And Ben and I have read way too many books, more than we'd like to admit, and we continue to read. And most of them say the very similar thing, where it all comes down to that effort, seeking expert help, and kind of enjoying it, and having fun and staying positive goes a very, very long way.
Yeah, right. Find the balance. Ultimately, if I can pull anything from our experiences, so our anecdotes, our stories, and combine that with what we know from the scientific literature around this stuff, is that there's parts that are going to suck and there's parts that should be fun. And there should be a healthy balance of those two as we kind of pursue trying to get better. And ultimately, the more and more I think about this, we talk about goal setting in other episodes and with other people, and ultimately people's goals in sport are going to look different. But I don't know how I actually feel the more I think about this. I don't know how much I feel about, like, my goal is to make the NHL. My goal is to win a Stanley Cup. I think ultimately your goal should be to do the best you can and get what you want out of that. And that might change from year to year. That might look different from year to year. And it's fine to ask an 8 or a 9-year-old, what's your goal? I'm going to play in the NHL one day. That's fine. That's a fun goal. 3-year-olds also all want to be firefighters, which is also cool. But right, there has to be this healthy dose of realism around the fact that, like, let's enjoy this process, the good, the bad, the grind, the fun.
Yeah, I like it when I love when athletes. Right? I like when athletes come to me and then go, I want to be the best that I can be. Yeah, that's exactly what I love, because that's all that we as coaches want. We just want you to be the best you can be. We want you to be good athletes. We want you to be good people. And we want to maximize that. And we don't know who's going to make it. Most people didn't think I was going to play pro or college or junior A, and I did. And there are some people that you're like, wow, this guy's like really, really good. They're going to go far, and they don't. But what we want to do is we want to make you the best you can be. And that's the attitude that we want you to have, because it allows you to trust the process, enjoy the journey that you're on, and without being so set on that outcome, because things will happen and things will come. But if we are completely set, if we're completely goal oriented and we're not focused on the journey, it is very easy to get derailed and discouraged. And that's where you see a lot of burnout.
Big time. Jamie, any kind of closing thoughts? This one's a bit of a ramble. We kind of touched a few things, resources and books and things we like and all those topics. But ultimately, let's try to summarize this down. Give me one key resource that you think is a good idea, and then give me one book recommendation. We'll call it a day.
So I am super biased. I will say my YouTube or Patreon, but something
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a good question. I think the best resource is your goalie coach that you're with. And I think that's really good. And I think sometimes people don't have that much of a personal relationship with their goalie coach. I'm not saying you got to be best friends and go to your birthday party and stuff, but talk to them and be a student of the game and learn from your goalie coach in all aspects of life. And the thing is too, is you might find that this goalie coach is someone you really like and you really want to work with, or maybe some of their philosophies and the way they approach the game and their goals for you aren't aligning, and aren't aligning with your values. And maybe that's going to give you some insight to move on and find another goalie coach. But to learn and understand and ask a lot of questions from your goalie coach that you have. And if you don't have one, there are a lot of remote goalie coaches, like myself included, that can help you and do these things. And I think that ultimately, that's the best resource you can have. Ben, what would your best resource be?
That would be only your Patreon if I start getting a percentage of it. But no, I really like your answer, honestly. I truthfully don't spend a ton of time on goalie coach social media, goalie coach, or goalie YouTube, only because I am someone who often gets frustrated with things that I see. And so
really?
for
I never
my
noticed that.
for my own health, Jamie, I try to not look at that unless you send me something and I'll look at it. But
I'm
I think
also in the same boat because there's a reason I don't follow a lot of people because I can't deal with it.
yeah. And like ultimately again, Jamie calls me a cynic. I like to call myself a bit skeptical. I like slow moving things, right? So my classic example is I think the panda is not a real thing. But people jumped on a wave because people jump on trends, and that's okay. I just don't think it's real. So ultimately, again, I really like your answer, Jamie. I think the resource is the best resource you can have as a goalie coach. And if you're a parent, if you're a goalie, if you're not able to have conversations or dialogue about this, consider wondering why, right? Like I know that we talked to a parent the other day about getting out of an RVH position. So this is why Panda came ahead in this story. And, you know, Jamie, you and I subscribe to the same philosophy around this golden triangle. If you haven't heard about this before, Jamie's got
trademarked.
Yeah. And actually, those are the words that the parents said themselves. So did they stumble across your work? Who's to say?
They must have because that's Jamie Phillips' original. So thank you, parents. I'm happy with that.
You're welcome. It was my job. It was my layup. Right. And so we talked about that situation with the parent for, half dozen minutes before our skate with their kid. And like, if you can't do that with your goalie coach, I don't know. I think you should be able to do that. And obviously, as a goalie coach, we're not being paid for those conversations, but it's part of the job, right? And so like, if you're a parent, you're a kid, and your goalie coach isn't doing that, they can't be one of your resources. They can't be someone to help you provide resources. Yeah, I'll call that a yellow flag.
That is funny because yes, we are not being paid, but if you're a parent, you can pay us in a coffee. Nothing starts a conversation about that a parent coming in with a coffee and being like, hey, can we talk about, little Jimmy or little Susie and just caffeinate us. That's all we want as coaches. We need that caffeine. And that is a good way to get that conversation started.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the most valuable things. And I think that's why, why we started this podcast partly too, is because there isn't a ton of resources around this stuff, right? And so if you're listening to this, you've made it this far in this episode, you've made it through me critiquing Jamie's library.
Yep.
What you can do is also go back in our episode catalog, right? Go back and check and see us how we talked about net drives, how we talked about transition defense, all those things. We've covered it before. And we're going to keep covering stuff moving forward. But if you want
detailed breakdowns of these, go to my Patreon.
Come on, don't steal my plug.
Okay, yes. Can you plug me so instead of I'm not plugging?
Yeah, I was about to do that and you cut me off. And so in goalie science classic fashion, before Jamie cuts me off, we are going to wrap it up here, which means if you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate all of our listeners in Denmark, South Korea, Australia, and last week we had someone from Madagascar. So thank you.
No way.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, who knows? Traveling person, bug in the system. I don't ask questions. Either way, we appreciate everyone listening and tuning in each and every week, or the weeks that you do tune in to listen. So if you like the podcast, share with a friend, post on Instagram, subscribe, give us 5 stars, whatever else you can do in this day and age to support the podcast. And we'll be sure to keep doing our best to provide some resources for everyone listening. Jamie, final thoughts?
No, just thanks for listening, everyone. Whether you're from Canada or Madagascar, we definitely appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe. It does go a lot. I know we plug it, everyone plugs it, but it actually does help a lot. But we really appreciate everyone listening, and hopefully you found some value in our little book club ramble chat today. Ben, until next week.
Until next time.